Snow has a way of swallowing sound, of making a town feel smaller and lonelier than it really is. In Frost Hollow, winter wasn't just a season. It was a living thing. It crept under doors, stung the skin, and whispered through the streets, like it wanted to own them. On nights like this, most people stayed inside, warmed by firelight or the hum of old heaters. But Officer Sawyer Clark was out there, moving through the frozen quiet, unaware that one small choice was about to change everything he thought he knew about duty, about compassion, and about family. It started the way most nights did. A routine, patrol, the crunch of his boots echoing against a world blanketed in white. The air was sharp, the kind that bit the lungs if you breathed too fast. Snow floated endlessly from the gray sky, falling in soft sheets that dimmed headlights and blurred the edges of buildings. The sun had dipped hours earlier, though the clock said it was barely past 4. Street lamps flickered on, their orange, halos weak and fading against the storm. Sawyer stepped out of his cruiser, tugging his scarf tighter. For a moment the warmth of the car clung to him. Then the winter cut through, waking every sense. At 39, his body carried the memory of training, lean and sturdy, but it also carried the weight of things unseen. His gray eyes were watchful, guarded, shaped by a past he didn't speak of. A soldier once, now a man who wore his badge not like a medal, but like a promise. He didn't crave glory. He craved order, safety, and honesty. Frost Hollow, beaten down by years of hard weather, gave him that. Until tonight. The silence shattered with voices, harsh and impatient. "Get out of here, filthy thing!" The words rode on the wind, sharp enough to cut through the storm. Sawyer turned his head toward Hayden's grocery, the one old shop that always smelled faintly of dust and potatoes. A small crowd had gathered out front. Arms waved, boots stomped, and in the middle of it all stood a lone figure. It was a German shepherd, female, about 5 or 6 years old. Her coat, once regal, was now ragged and clotted with frost. Her ribs showed through the matted fur, her body trembling with hunger and cold. She didn't bark, she didn't growl. She only stood there, ears pinned, tail curled under, eyes fixed on the ground, as if bracing for whatever would come next. Mrs. Green, with her wild silver curls tucked under a knit hat, brandished a broom like a weapon. "That mutt's been sniffing around here all week," she grumbled. "Won't leave us alone." From behind her, Mr. Hayden himself appeared, holding a snow shovel with both hands. His face was hard, always tight, as though winter itself had insulted him. "Stray," he spat. "Dangerous. Who knows what she's carrying? Get lost." He raised the shovel high. "That's enough," Sawyer said, his voice firm, carrying across the crowd. The old grocer froze, shovel hovering in the air. "She's scaring off my customers." "She's not doing anything," Sawyer replied evenly. His gaze fell back to the shepherd. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't even begging. She was surviving, her shallow breaths puffing white into the air, frost clinging to her whiskers. Sawyer's chest tightened. He crouched, moving slow, and reached into his jacket. His lunch, a ham sandwich wrapped in foil, and a half-wrapped sausage link, was still warm. He unwrapped the sandwich halfway and held it out. "Hey, girl," he murmured gently. "Hungry?" The shepherd twitched her ears, lifted her head slightly, and stepped forward. Her movements were careful, deliberate. She took the sandwich, without so much as brushing his glove, her mouth precise, as though someone had once trained her never to bite a hand no matter how desperate she became. Then, before anyone could blink, she turned and ran. Not in panic, not in fear, but with intent, with purpose. The sandwich dangled from her mouth as she vanished into the storm. Sawyer blinked, realizing something in his gut. She could have eaten it right there, devoured it in seconds. But she hadn't. She was carrying it somewhere, to someone. He stood, eyes narrowing, watching her paw prints fill with drifting snow. His instincts whispered that this wasn't over. Adjusting his scarf, he waved the crowd off. "Get back inside. She's not your problem." Without another word, he crossed the street, his boots crunching through the snow, and followed her. Trail into the alley. He didn't know why. Maybe it was her silence, the way she hadn't made a single sound. Maybe it was the strange urgency in the way she carried the food. Or maybe it was something deeper. A soldier's instinct telling him there was more to this than what met the eye. Her tracks cut past dumpsters, behind the old hardware store, and out toward the edge of town where Frost Hollow faded into abandoned lots and broken-down buildings. The wind roared here, pushing hard at his back, but he pressed on. The paw prints remained clear, close together, steady, leading him down toward an old railway bridge, its beams splintered, its bolts rusted to a dull brown. Beneath it, the world hushed. The bridge blocked the worst of the wind, leaving only the sound of Sawyer's boots breaking the crust. Of snow. He ducked under a beam, snow dusting his shoulders, and froze. A sound. Faint. Not wind, not the creak of wood. Softer. Needier. And then he saw her. The German shepherd crouched in the shadowed corner beneath the bridge, her body curled around three tiny wriggling shapes. Puppies. Newborn. Their fur patchy. Their eyes sealed shut. They lay in a nest of rags, newspapers, and brittle straw, their tiny breaths puffing like weak candles in the cold. The mother lifted her head slowly, eyes fixed on Sawyer. Wide, cautious, but not panicked. She didn't snarl or lunge. She simply watched. Sawyer's throat tightened. "So that's where you were going," he whispered. On the ground beside her lay the half-eaten sandwich he had given. She had carried it all the way back, saving it until she returned, nibbling just enough to keep herself alive. Then she lay down again, shifting so her pups could nurse. Her body was frail, but her will to protect them was fierce. One pup, the smallest, with a faint gray stripe along its back, squirmed weakly, unable to latch. Its tiny chest rose and fell too fast, too shallow. Sawyer's heart twisted. She wasn't scavenging for herself. She was fighting for them, and by the look of her trembling frame, it was a fight she was losing. He took a slow step forward, both hands open. "I'm not going to hurt them. Or you." She didn't flinch. That surprised him. She only blinked, then turned her head back, toward her struggling pup, licking its frail body with a tongue cracked from thirst. Sawyer lowered himself into the snow beside a crumbling pillar, his coat crunching beneath him. Up close he could see her better now. Her coat, though dirty, still carried the markings of a proud shepherd. Her ears were chipped, her tail twitched weakly, and her eyes looked older than her years, worn with battles unseen. The den offered almost no protection. The cold poured in through gaps in the boards. Snow piled against the edges like a creeping tide. The pups had no chance here, not with night falling and one already fading fast. Sawyer unzipped his coat slowly. From inside, he pulled a thin emergency blanket, spreading it carefully over his knees. Then he slipped off his gloves, pressing them to his chest to warm them before speaking softly. "We're getting you out of here." The shepherd blinked up at him again. Still no growl, no snap, just quiet trust. Sawyer leaned forward, reaching first for the weakest pup. It was icy cold, legs twitching faintly. He cupped it in both hands, wrapped it carefully in the spare scarf from his pocket, and tucked it close to his chest. The other two whimpered softly as he lifted them one by one, sliding them into the warm interior of his coat. He zipped it halfway to hold them secure against his body heat. Then, slowly, he looked back at the mother. Finally, he turned back to the mother. "I need you to trust me now. Just a little longer." He rose, stepping backward toward his cruiser, parked several blocks away. The shepherd stood slowly. She didn't whimper or limp, but her movements were stiff. The snow clung to her legs. She looked once at the pups bundled in his coat, then followed. No leash, no commands. She simply followed. Minutes later, the cruiser's headlights glowed faintly through the snow as Sawyer opened the back door and placed the pups gently into a padded crate he'd kept in the trunk for strays. The heater inside blasted warm air, and the smallest pup stirred just slightly. He opened the passenger side door. The mother dog stood for a moment staring at the seat, then hopped in, curling into a tight circle. She let out a breath so deep it fogged the glass. Sawyer climbed behind the wheel, put the car in drive, and tapped the dashboard. "Hold on, Mama," he murmured. "We're not done yet." And with that, the cruiser rolled forward, cutting through snowdrifts toward Frost Hollow's only veterinary clinic. The wheels of the patrol cruiser hissed against the snowy road as Officer Sawyer Clark turned onto Elm Street, where the glowing green cross of Monroe Veterinary Clinic blinked dimly against the snowfall. The clinic was nestled in the corner of a quiet intersection, its windows fogged from within and a soft halo of light spilling out onto the frozen pavement. It was nearly 6:30 p.m., and most of Frost Hollow had already shut down for the storm, but Laya never closed. Not really. Dr. Laya Monroe was in her late 50s, tall and thin, with high cheekbones and a posture that looked like it had once been regal, now bent slightly forward as if she carried something invisible on her back. Her dark auburn hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a low bun, and her eyes, gray like smoke, seemed to always be watching with more weight than she let on. She lived alone above the clinic, never remarried after losing her son Tyler, a canine handler who died on duty 5 years ago. Since then, Laya had devoted herself to the animals that came through her door, particularly retired or injured service dogs. When Sawyer pulled up, the lights inside were still on. He parked under the eave and gently stepped out of the car, clutching the bundled blanket where the 3 puppies slept against his chest. The German Shepherd sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching him. Her breathing had steadied, but her eyes were sharp, alert. Sawyer opened the door. "Come on, girl. We've got someone who can help." She didn't hesitate. She stepped down onto the snowy ground, sniffed the air once, then followed him to the clinic's glass door. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and lavender met them. The warmth hit immediately, and the puppy stirred slightly in the folds of the wool. Laya was already walking toward them from the back hallway, pulling on a gray fleece over her scrubs. "Didn't expect to see you tonight, Sawyer," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "You look like hell." He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Found them under the old rail bridge. 3 pups, one struggling. Mom hasn't eaten properly in days." Laya's eyes dropped to the bundle, then rose to the dog standing quietly beside him. She blinked once, a flicker of recognition in her face. Without another word, she unlocked the side door and waved them in. "Exam room 2, let's move." The shepherd padded behind them in silence, her ears twitching at each sound, but her steps steady. In the exam room, the lights were brighter, the steel table cool and spotless. Laya flicked on the heater in the corner, setting it to high, then retrieved clean towels and a heated blanket from a storage cabinet. Sawyer gently placed the puppies on the towel. Laya worked fast hands, sure, breath even. She examined each one with the practiced calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, yet still cared each time like it was the first. "This one's hypothermic," she said, nodding toward the smallest pup. "Barely has enough blood sugar to keep his heart going." She wrapped the pup in a warming pouch and inserted a tiny needle into its thigh. Glucose solution dripped in slow, controlled pace. She didn't look up as she added, "You did the right thing bringing them in." Sawyer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "She followed me without a leash," he said. "Didn't growl, didn't bark, just walked right into the car." Laya turned her head slightly, studying the mother. She's calm, focused, like she's been trained to, follow orders, but also she paused. She's holding herself like she's waiting for something to go wrong. Sawyer nodded. She reminds me of someone who's seen war. Laya approached the dog now slowly. Hey there, sweetheart, she said, crouching. Can I see your ears? The shepherd didn't move. She allowed Laya to brush the fur gently aside, checking for tattoos, tags, anything. There's a scar behind the right ear, Laya murmured. Looks surgical. Could be from a chip implant. She grabbed the scanner from the shelf, waved it slowly near the dog's neck. A beep, green light. Leia looked at the screen. No name registered, but the chip code starts with K9E. She frowned. That's a federal designation. She was a working dog. Sawyer didn't speak for a moment. The room seemed to settle, the heat washing over them in a heavy silence. Echo. That's what I'll call her, he thought suddenly. A name that sounded like strength remembered. He looked at the dog again, this time not as a stray, but as something discarded by the system she once served. She was left out there, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Laya straightened and walked over to her small desk. She typed quickly into the registry system, trying to cross-reference the code, but nothing came up. The file was locked, restricted, possibly military. We might not get much more from this, she said. Unless we pull someone who knows the back end. Sawyer exhaled slowly. Laya gave him a look, half stern, half soft. You can leave them here tonight. I'll monitor the pup's vitals. The others are stable, but they'll need formula. She probably doesn't have much milk left. I'll stay, he said without hesitation. I'm off duty anyway. She nodded once. Then grab that stool. It's going to be a long night. He sat down in the corner, watching as Leia gently moved the mother to a quiet crate lined with heating pads. Echo, now officially her name in his mind, didn't resist. She curled around her puppies again, sighing softly, her body finally allowed to rest. Laya dimmed the lights. For a while the room was quiet, just the sound of breathing and the rhythmic beep of a monitor. Sawyer leaned back, letting his head rest against the wall. His bones were tired, but his chest was warm. He didn't know why exactly. He only knew one thing. This wasn't over. The clinic was quiet, except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional soft whimper of a nursing pup. Outside, the snow had turned to sleep, painting the streets of Frost Hollow in shimmering ice. Officer Sawyer Clark sat hunched over the corner workstation, the glow of the screen reflecting in his storm-gay eyes. On the floor nearby, Echo lay curled around her 3 pups. Her breathing had steadied, her ribs still visible, but her body no longer shaking. The mother in her was relentless. She had eaten only enough to stay upright, letting the rest of her energy go to milk. The pups were feeding now, blind, pink-bellied, fragile. Sawyer exhaled and clicked the final tab in the encrypted database. He had bypassed 2 layers of credentials to get here. The internal decommissioned K9 incident reports. Unit tag E0-14, name, Echo. Breed, German Shepherd. Age at discharge, 4-year service division, Western Metro. K9 Task Force, handler, name redacted. Reason for discharge. Failure to comply during active pursuit. Aggression redirected. Deemed liability. Note, future use. Not advised. Dangerous. Sawyer frowned. Aggression redirected. Laya Monroe appeared beside him, holding a mug of peppermint tea. Her red hair was loosely tied back, the curls frizzed from long hours. She wore a deep green thermal top under her lab coat, sleeves pushed up. She looked down at the screen, her lips pressed in a thin line. That sounds like bureaucratic code for something messy. Sawyer clicked open the incident log. There was only one entry, vague, barely a paragraph. During narcotics pursuit, subject Echo failed to follow bite command. Instead, She positioned herself defensively in front of civilian minor. Officer issued repeat command. Echo remained non-compliant. Officer injured during apprehension. Dog removed from service. That's it, Sawyer said. No medical report, no follow-up. Laya sat down beside him. A bite command refused to protect a child. Sawyer's voice was low. That's not dangerous, that's judgment. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. They punished her for saving a kid. Laya nodded slowly, looking at Echo. She was trained to take down suspects, but she made a choice, and they called it defiance. She was just doing the right thing. Sawyer murmured, then added, "Same thing most departments don't know how to process anymore." The wind slammed against the windows, making both of them flinch. Laya stood up and crossed the room to Echo's crate. The mother dog lifted her head but didn't growl, only blinked, her deep amber eyes tired, but alert. Laya crouched and gently stroked Hirar's. "You remember it all, don't you?" Echo didn't move, but her breathing slowed. The smallest pup stirred and let out a whimper barely louder than a sigh. Laya stood and turned back. "I think I have a contact in the old Metro task force. If they still have body cam footage of that day, maybe we'll find the truth." Sawyer nodded. "Do it." Here turned to the screen. "And I'll put in a request for the civilian report. If there really was a kid, someone must have followed up." They worked side by side in silence after that. The kind of silence that shared purpose rather than absence. Each keystroke, each search query was a step into the shadowy corners of a system that had failed. A loyal dog. Sawyer paused once more before logging off, eyes still on Echo. "Whatever happened," he said quietly, "you didn't deserve to be thrown away." The frost had lifted, but the cold still clung to the bones of Frost Hollow. Snow gave way to patches of ice and earth as the town exhaled the quiet breath of mid-winter thaw. Inside the clinic, the wood burning, stove crackled in its corner, radiating a gentle orange glow across the tiled floor. The smell of pine smoke mingled with the faint scent of antiseptic. Officer Sawyer Clark sat at the corner table with a flash drive in hand, staring at the envelope. It had arrived in. The handwriting was tight, slanted, and vaguely familiar. He'd received the package that morning, slid beneath the door of the police outpost. No return address, just a note. "You deserve the truth, MC." He plugged it into Wyla's old laptop. The screen flickered once, then loaded a grainy video. The timestamp read September 14th, 2 years ago. The footage came from a body cam. The view bounced with each breath of the officer. Voices shouted. A child screamed. Flashlights scanned a dark warehouse, rusted shelves and crates looming like shadows. Then came a growl. Echo burst into view, sleek and agile coat shining under the light. She sprinted ahead, barking sharply. One officer yelled, "Bite!" The command was clear, but Echo ignored it. Instead, she veered left, leapt onto a crate, and landed in front of a young girl, bound and trembling behind a stack of wooden pallets. Then chaos. Another figure appeared, a man in plain clothes, shouting. Echo spun toward him, ears up, tail stiff, uncertain. He lunged, trying to grab the girl. Echo lunged faster. The bite was fast, defensive, not fatal, but bloody. The man screamed. Officers rushed in. The girl was carried out. The man clutched his arm and shouted words lost in static. Moments later, someone barked, "Shut that camera off!" And the video ended. Sawyer sat frozen. The Maneko bit. He recognized him now. He was Wesley Mardane, cousin to the deputy commissioner, at the time. He wasn't registered on that mission. He wasn't supposed to be there. Echo didn't fail, Sawyer whispered. She did what no one else could. Laya Monroe walked in, drying her hands on a towel. She paused when she saw the look in his eyes. "You found something," He turned the laptop toward her. They watched in silence. When it ended, Laya's breath hitched. They buried it. Sawyer's jaw tensed. They blamed her to protect someone connected to power. Laya clenched the towel and discharged. Tossed her away. Outside the exam room, a soft bark broke the tension. Echo was up, standing alert at the gate, watching them. She'd felt the shift in energy, like she knew her name had been spoken in truth. Sawyer stood slowly. She saved that girl. Laya nodded and paid the price. That night, Sawyer wrote a statement, attached the video, marked it with his badge number. He posted it to the Frost Hollow precinct board, then sent it to the regional K9 command. But it didn't stop there. With Laya's help, he uploaded the clip to the town's local community page. No commentary, just facts. Let the truth speak. And it did. Within hours, the post spread like fire across the snowy town. Comments flooded in. Words like hero, injustice, and bring her back. A local reporter called before dawn. By sunrise, someone had already painted a mural of Echo on a concrete wall behind the library. Her eyes fierce, standing guard beside the words, "Loyalty never lies." Sawyer walked down Main Street later that day, coffee in hand. For the first time since he moved back to Frost Hollow, people nodded, smiled. A few even clapped his shoulder. Echo had become more than a dog. She had become a symbol. Back at the clinic, the pups were growing fast. The largest one, a Malay with a white stripe on his nose, had started walking in wide, clumsy steps. The runt, the one with the crooked tail, still needed warmth, often sleeping pressed beneath Echo's neck. One morning, Sawyer found Echo in the back room standing over her pups. She gave a low whistle, sharp, short. The largest pup raised his head. She did it again. This time, the pup stumbled toward her. Sawyer crouched nearby. "She's training them," he said in awe. Echo turned her gaze toward him, tail flicking once. "She's not just a mother," Laya said softly behind him. "She's still a K9. Sawyer looked down at the pups, half playful, half curious. Maybe she's making sure they know who they are, where they come from. That night, while the wind howled over rooftops and the town slept beneath frost, Echo stood watch by the door. The stove glowed quietly behind her. Harry's didn't close. Not fully. Not yet. The snow outside had softened to a gentle hush, blanketing the sidewalks of Frost Hollow in powdery white. Inside the small veterinary clinic, warmth flickered from an old gas stove in the corner. The scent of chamomile tea drifted faintly, mingling with the comforting smell of fresh hay and antiseptic. Echo lay curled beside her pups, now chubby and curious, their eyes open and ears twitching at every sound. The bell above the door tinkled softly. Laya looked up from her clipboard and offered a warm smile. "Evelyn." "What a surprise!" Evelyn Hart stepped in, her boots dusted with snow. She was in her late 60s, a slender woman with silver curls tucked beneath a burgundy knit cap. Her eyes, kind and observant, swept the room before resting on the mother dog and her pups. "I read about her in the paper," Evelyn said, setting down her mittens. The K9 turned hero again. She approached the pen slowly, kneeling without hesitation. Echo lifted her head, watching cautiously. Her eyes, still sharp, tracked Evelyn's movement, but her tail gave a faint thump of recognition. Laya chuckled. "She's picky. You've passed her test." "I've worked with enough souls who've forgotten how to trust," Evelyn said gently. "Some wounds don't bleed, but they still ache." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a hardcover book titled Where the Wild Things Are. "I have an idea," she said, turning to Laya. "It's unconventional." By the following week, the clinic's side room had been transformed. A shelf of picture books now stood beside a row of floor cushions and beanbags. The sign on the door read, "Paws and Pages, Quiet Reading with Quiet Friends." Children with anxiety, selective mutism, and mild autism began trickling in, some holding the hands of weary but hopeful parents. They were drawn not only by thestories, but by the gentle presence of Echo and her pups, now named Scout, Maple, and Dusty. Scout, easily the most curious of the three, had a shiny black coat, one floppy ear, and a habit of tilting his head whenever someone spoke. He was always the first to approach a child, especially when they seemed unsure. One morning, a woman arrived with her son, Leo. He was about 8 with sandy brown hair, a downturned mouth, and a stiff grip on a stuffed rabbit missing an eye. His mother signed the waiver silently. Mouthing, he doesn't speak. Not since last year. Leo sat cross-legged near the far corner, his shoulders tense. Scout padded over and plopped down beside him, tail sweeping gently. Leo didn't look up, but he didn't move away either. Day after day, Leo returned. He never spoke. He barely touched the books, but he always chose the same spot, and Scout always found his way to Leo's side. Sometimes the pup rested his chin on the boy's knee. Sometimes he merely breathed beside him, syncing his rhythm to the child's quiet world. Evelyn observed from afar, never rushing. "Connection is never forced," she whispered to Leo one afternoon. "It's earned like trust, like love." Then on the 12th visit, it happened. Leo was holding a book with trembling fingers, eyes darting across the page. Scout, as usual, sat beside him. The room was quiet, the fire humming in the background. Suddenly Leo whispered, "Wild!" His voice cracked. Scout's ear sparked. Leo turned slightly toward the dog, lowering his face so close it almost touched the Scout's. "Wild things," he murmured. Tears welled up in his mother's eyes. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. Laya stood frozen in the doorway. "And Scout?" He simply wagged his tail and leaned in closer. Echo watched from her mat nearby. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. She had done enough by just being there. A presence, a calm, a mother. Later that evening, as the children had left and the books were back on their shelf, Evelyn sat beside Echo. "You were never just muscle," she whispered, stroking the dog's fur. "You were medicine." Echo let out a slow breath and tucked her nose beneath her paw, her puppies curled against her side. She hadn't been trained for this, but some hearts didn't need training to heal others. They just needed the chance. The night of Christmas Eve blanketed frost-hollow insolence. Snow drifted down like soft ashes, covering roofs, sidewalks, and pine. Trees in a hush of white. Warm lights glowed behind closed curtains, and the streets were nearly empty, save for the faint hum of the wind and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Inside the small veterinary clinic on Maple Street, Echo lay, curled on a thick woolen blanket in the corner, her pups nestled tightly against her. Sawyer Clark sat nearby on a folding chair, nursing a cup of lukewarm cocoa, chatting with Laya Monroe, who was finishing paperwork at the reception desk. Laya, in her early 50s, had sharp gray eyes softened by laugh lines and a deep compassion, earned through decades of heartbreak and healing. She wore a maroon cardigan and snow boots, her silver-streaked hair tied in a bun. Though the clinic was closed, she'd offered Sawyer and Echo shelter for the night, just in case the cold worsened. Suddenly, Echo lifted her head, her ears perked, nostrils flaring. She rose slowly, stepping away from her pups with a quiet whine. Then she let out a low growl, not aggressive, but urgent, a sound Sawyer had learned to respect. "What is it, girl?" he asked, standing. Echo padded toward the door, pawed it once, then again, then barked sharply. Sawyer moved to the door, but before he could open it, Echo used her nose to nudge a woolen scarf off the hook and trotted back to the door, dragging it behind her like a message. Laya looked up. "She's trying to say something." Without hesitation, Sawyer unlocked the door and the wind slapped them with a gust of icy air. Echo dashed out, turning immediately left toward the dimly lit sidewalk along the main road. Laya grabbed her coat. Sawyer took a flashlight and they followed down the street near the old bus shelter. Echo came to a stop. She barked again, short, sharp, and direct. Under the shelter, partially hidden behind a rusted trash bin, lay a frail figure slumped on the ground. "Dear God," Laya whispered. Sawyer rushed forward. The man was old, his skin ghost-pale, beard thick with ice crystals, and his body curled inward in a fetal position. His clothes were threadbare, a thin jacket over a flannel shirt, torn jeans, no gloves. Next to him, a plastic grocery bag held stale bread and a broken thermos. "Sir," Sawyer knelt. "Can you hear me?" No response. "He's breathing, but shallow," Laya said, checking his wrist. "Hypothermia. If we don't move him now—" Sawyer didn't wait. He wrapped his jacket around the man's upper body, lifted him gently and carried him back toward the clinic. Eka stayed close to his heels, glancing up with every step as if to make sure they were doing it right. Back at the clinic, Leia turned up the heat and prepared a warm compress. Sawyer laid the man on the examination table and started rubbing his arms to stimulate circulation. Echo sat near the table, eyes locked on the man, alert but calm. After 15 tense minutes, the man groaned faintly. His eyes opened dull blue, clouded with age and fatigue. "You're safe," Sawyer said gently. "You're inside. You'll be okay." The man blinked slowly. The dog," she smiled. "Yes, she found you." He whispered, "Angel." They learned his name was Franklin Boyd, 71. Once a construction worker, once a father, now with no home after a heart surgery wiped out his savings. He'd been riding buses to stay warm but missed the last one before Christmas Eve. "I didn't think anyone would come," he said, his voice raspy. "But then I saw Hare, this beautiful dog." He reached out and stroked Echo's head. She didn't flinch, just leaned into the touch. That moment, silent, simple, moved Leia to tears. By morning, news of Echo's rescue spread quickly. Frost Hollow wasn't a big town. Word passed through the bakery, the post office, and the fire station like wind through pine trees. By noon, several neighbors had dropped off food, blankets, and clothes for Franklin. A woman from the town council left a card and said they'd arranged temporary housing. But more than anything, everyone came to see Echo. They left thank you notes, tied in ribbon. Someone brought her a chew toy shaped like a reindeer. Children pressed their hands to the glass to glimpse the dog who had saved a life on Christmas Eve. Sawyer stepped outside with Echo as snow fell gently, tiny crystals catching in her fur. "She doesn't even know what she did," he said half to himself. "She does," Laya said, joining him. "But she doesn't need praise. She just follows her heart." That evening, the townspeople gathered outside the clinic. There was no parade, no grand ceremony, just warm lights, gloved hands clapping, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Thank you, Echo, Guardian of Christmas Eve." The new year crept in quietly, dusted in white. Frost Hollow lay beneath a hush of fresh snow, the kind that softened sound and slowed time. Up on Hillridge Lane, a small cottage sat under a slope of pine trees, its chimney trailing a thin ribbon of smoke into the pale morning sky. Inside that cottage, warmth glowed. Sawyer Clark stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching snowflakes settle on the white picket fence he'd painted just last week. It was a modest house, at-woo bedroom fixer-upper with a wraparound porch and creaky floorboards. But it had space, a fenced yard, a fireplace, and now it had family. Echo lay curled by the hearth, her silver and tan coat gleaming in the firelight. Her frame had filled out in recent weeks, no longer gaunt, but strong again. On her neck hung a leather collar, dark brown, with a polished brass plate that read, "Echo Hero Mother K9, retired with honor." Sawyer had engraved it himself. The pups, Scout, Maple, and Dusty, tumbled across the thick rug, still full of morning mischief. They were 4 months old now, clumsy but bright-eyed, each bearing a spark of their mother's vigilance and quiet wisdom. Scout had Aslight Crook in one ear, always standing tall and alert. Maple, the smallest, stuck to Echo's side like a shadow. Dusty, the explorer, had already figured out how to open the back screen door with his nose. Sawyer set his coffee down and crossed to the fireplace. He sank into the armchair, boots off, wool socks warming on the stone ledge. Echo lifted her head, eyes tracking him, and after a pause, patted over and gently laid her head on his foot. He smiled, reaching down to stroke behind her ears. "You're home now," he whispered. And somehow those 3 words carried the weight of all the broken years behind them. Just a month ago he'd lived alone in a silent apartment above the hardware store. No laughter, no movement, only the echo of boots on floorboards and police radios in the dark. But since the night he'd followed a starving mother dog through the snow, his life had shifted like tectonic plates. Slowly, but permanently. Later that morning, Laya Monroe arrived, bringing a housewarming gift, a homemade quilt with paw prints, stitched along the edges. She wore a knitted scarf of forest green and brought biscuits for the pups in a paper sack that crinkled with joy. She stepped in, snowflakes still in her hair, and gasped with mock drama. "Well, look at this little kingdom," Sawyer chuckled. "We're still training the royalty to use the backyard instead of the kitchen." Laya crouched immediately, surrounded by excited tails and happy whines. Echo stood a little behind them, watching. When Laya opened her arms, Echo approached slowly, Tao, wagging low. "She trusts now," Laya said softly. "She saved a man's life on Christmas Eve," Sawyer replied, "and saved mine every day since." They sat down by the fire, sipping hot cider and telling stories. Laya shared one about her son, Michael, who had trained with a K9 unit much like Echo before he passed. It wasn't the sad kind of story anymore. Time had softened the edges. In Echko, she'd found not just a memory, but a reason to smile again. By afternoon, Franklin Boyd came up the hill, bundled in a borrowed coat. He'd begun staying at the town's shelter and helped shovel snow for the church in exchange for hot meals. Sawyer had kept in touch. Franklin leaned on his cane as he stepped onto the porch. "You built this fence yourself?" Hesked, eyeing the straight rails. "Mostly," Sawyer said. "Dusty tried Teat the hammer, so it took longer." Franklin laughed deep and hoarse like someone remembering how. As evening fell, Sawyer lit the fireplace again, fed the pups, and let them collapse in a warm, snoring pile beneath the window. Outside, the snow had thickened. Flakes danced in the porch light like glitter. Shaken from the sky, Echo stood at the threshold, gazing out. Sawyer joined her. The cold bit at his cheeks, but he didn't care. The town was quiet. Somewhere below, bells rang faintly. A church service, perhaps. Children sang carols, but here on this hill it was just a man, a dog, and the life they'd chosen to rebuild. He looked down at Echo. "That night when I cut the rope around your neck," he murmured, "I thought I was saving you." She looked up, eyes catching the glow of the fire behind them. "But it turns out," he whispered, "you were saving me too." She leaned into him, her side pressed against his leg. Inside, the pups stirred, chasing dream rabbits across imaginary snowfields. The fire popped gently, and above them, on the snow-covered roof, light from the windows glowed soft and golden like a beacon to anyone lost in the dark. A home wasn't just walls and doors. Sometimes it was made of choices, of second chances, of forgiveness offered without words. And sometimes it was found in the eyes of a dog who never gave up. Sometimes the miracles we pray for don't come wrapped in grand gestures or loud thunder. Sometimes they arrive on 4 legs with tired eyes and a heart that refuses to give up. Echo was more than a dog. She was proof that even what the world throws away can still carry light. In a cold world, kindness is a fire. And when we choose to open our door, when we choose to love the broken, we don't just save them, they save us too. Maybe you felt like Echo, forgotten, judged, or misunderstood. Or maybe, like Sawyer, you've been searching for something to remind you that life still holds purpose. This story is a reminder that grace often finds us when we least expect it, and that somewhere God is always working, even through pause and snowfall. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and type Amen if you believe in second chances, in healing, and in the quiet miracles only God can give. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more true stories of faith, love, and redemption. May God bless you and every soul still waiting to be